And so let's go ahead and get started. We did the thesis statement. We'll do more either tomorrow or Monday. We'll do another one and just kind of keep doing every few days to where it just becomes. It wasn't a big deal yesterday. Most of you got it done in just a couple minutes, but it would become even easier and less worrisome. Just see questions. And I'll take ones that are similar or even ones for former AP exams. And usually be about what we've studied before or what we're doing right there. Want it done quick. But that's why you do a brainstorm list. If you have something it's not immediately fresh in your mind, you do a brainstorm, it brings you back some memories. And also we're going to do a few things where I'm going to give you an essay question about a certain era, and you're going to have to write a brainstorm list and a thesis. We'll do stuff like that. We'll do it right now?
Yes.
Okay, clear. I would have a question ready back and wing it. Spanish-American War. So the Spanish-American War, 1898, and this is Uncle Sam, and you notice he's getting bigger. The tailor is fitting him out with a new outfit, and it has Texas and Louisiana Purchase, Florida, all the expansion of the United States. Now, first off, who's the tailor represent? Who? What person? Say it again. That's President McKinley. And is this pro or anti-imperialism? Why do you say pro? Yeah, enlightened foreign policy. Rational expansion, exactly. So when you look at these, look for little things. Read a political cartoon. Try to figure out if you can identify the character. Hopefully you could. Once it's in McKinley, hopefully you're like, oh yeah, that's McKinley. And then you'll look for things like this, and also facial expressions. He's jolly. Things like that will help you. And that's a pretty good cartoon. And that one actually has been on an AP exam. And they have redone other cartoons, or reused. But it's a good example of a good cartoon they'll use, which is good. In Cuba, there have been a couple revolutions in Cuba already. And who controlled Cuba? Not yet. Okay. No, Cuba, then it was Spain. And in 1890, there was another civil war. And the United States has been involved. Always had their eye on Cuba. Remember, it's only 90 miles from Florida. If you remember back in the 1850s, when the South wanted more slave states, you remember this group called, do you remember the filibusters? Does that sound familiar? The filibusters wanted to go down, like this one took Nicaragua, to get more slave states. By the way, filibuster is unlimited debate in what body of Congress? Yeah, the Senate. Where today it requires 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate. Almost anything. So it's supermajority. It's impossible to get anything passed. And they don't pass anything. Except for a few changes in that rule. But there was a revolution beginning in the late 1880s against Spanish rule. And the leader of it, well, Jose Marti would be, the leader's a little bit strong because it was a guerrilla fight, but the group is called Cuba Libre, Liberty for Cuba. And there's Marti, and this is a stylized picture, so they have the Cuban flag behind him. He's got a great mustache. Those are some Cuban guerrillas. And, Cuba's really good for guerrilla fighting. Jungle, mountains, attack small Spanish units going to the mountain. Most of the Cuban peasants supported the guerrillas, gave them food and protection. And their weapons would be whatever they happened to have. So machetes or farm implements. I mean, these are bloody, awful things. Spain was a decrepit empire. It was in decline. Its monarchy only had about a decade left to survive. Then it would be overthrown. Well, replaced with a republic, and then there would be civil war. But they wanted to hold on to their empire. It was like, we still want to prove we're strong. We're going to keep Spain or Puerto Rico, a couple places in Africa, island of Guam. What's another big, it's actually a really big Spanish colony. In Asia. Near the South, in the South China Sea. Say it again. The Philippines. So, a lot of people live there. Spain actually colonized it. Magellan would give Spain their first claim to that land, not bother the rest of the people back in 1520. So Spain has controlled that for a long time. Well, they're fighting this guerrilla war, and they're doing quite well by 1895. But then Spain decided we got to stop that. So stop it in the short run. They started what's called the reconcentration policy. And it was led by a German-born general named Valeria Weiler, but it's Weiler. And soon he would be dubbed the Butcher. And those people are victims of reconcentration policy. The idea was they'd go into an area, a district, and they would take all the peasants who the Spanish believed were helping the guerrillas and put them into one common location known as a reconcentration camp. And then anybody outside was a guerrilla, and they could kill them. And they would also purposely mistreat the people within the camps, not feed them, make their living conditions horrible. And if you get tired of it, you can't run. It's going okay.
It's fine.
So far, okay. Because they wanted to use terror to make it as miserable as possible, so they would, they won't have guerrillas again. Those are victims of those camps. Britain would adopt these camps in the Boer War. Some of you might have heard of that in South Africa. That turned going in 1899, about 1902, against the Boers, which were Dutch settlers in South Africa. The U.S. would use it in the Philippines. But the name reconcentration camp, that would be changed, shortened to, and that's where concentration camps come from. It's this. And it is a weapon of terror. It comes from reconcentration. And they did this, other countries would follow this, but what about guerrillas caught outside? They would be tortured to death. They'd be garroted. And garroted is a slow strangulation. Now, sometimes it can be done just with a rope. And you ever see a movie where, like they have a commando or, come with a rope behind somebody and strangle them with that? That's called garroted. But these seats had a leather strap. They would strap them in, and then this one, you turn each crank, and the leather strap would slowly tighten. They could make this last 2 or 3 days of hell. But this one is the most cruel one. Look how this one tightens. This pushes them back. And it's a race between whether or not they get strangulated or it severs their spine. These both are probably staged, but some have said this was a real one. I don't think so. But can you imagine how horrible of torture this was? So they're using torture and terror. Actually, for the Spanish, in the short run, by end of 1897, early 1898, it was kind of working. The guerrillas had gone to the hills. It wouldn't have worked in the long run, but in the short run. But the United States had always watched this. And these kind of stories, bloody, horrible atrocities with pictures like the ones I just showed you, made great press in yellow journalism. Yellow journalism was, okay, it hasn't really changed that much, but it's sensationalism in journalism. To try to sell, this time, newspapers. There were over 100 daily newspapers in New York, like 150, and like another 300 weekly newspapers. So they're all in bitter competition. The leading newspaper was Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. By the way, the New York Times, which is the biggest newspaper in the United States now, it was a relatively small newspaper. But since it did not survive on just selling so many of these trashy stories, it survived. I'm not saying they don't have some trashy stories, but not as many. And Pulitzer had a formula to get people to buy it. He had things like, he was the first one to have Sunday comics, and then Sunday comics with color. Pretty big deal to sell papers. And we'll come back to that in just one second. But what he would do is, he would use reporters to go out and find the most spectacular stories. He would have reporters bribing hospitals and morgue attendants so they get pictures of bodies that were brutally beaten or killed or or died in some strange way. They had they'd pay off police officers so they'd be the first one on the scenes. In fact, by the 1890s, the paper itself was involved in investigating crimes and putting rewards out. And they would actually look for criminals. I'm not saying that kind of stuff doesn't happen as much as like today, but then it was all the time. And these pretty amazing journalistic practices, he felt a little guilty. And in his endowment, he put down for when he died for his fortune, the Pulitzer Prize for excellence in journalism. A little bit like Leland Stanford making the college, when people didn't remember the other things he did. But the up-and-coming William Randolph Hearst, he would write the New York Journal. He would own it. And Hearst made his money the old-fashioned way. What's the old-fashioned way? Yeah, he inherited a fortune from his parents who just happened to have land that was oil. And he bought this failing newspaper and did the same practices and even more. And they both learned jingoism sold papers. Jingoism, anybody know what jingoism is? It's a great word. It's such a cool word, just not used as much anymore. You remember? Yeah, to push for war. Extreme nationalism. Now, yes, USA, and almost always for war, or other countries would do it. Extreme nationalism. And what would they push? Sensational stories about Cuba, emphasizing the atrocities there, saying the U.S. should get involved. And remember, the U.S. has a desire now for colonies. They've always had their eye on Cuba. Here's a classic world headline. I just think this is hilarious. This is from 1890. That's their front page. A woman jumped from Brooklyn Bridge. It looks like a cap to me, but by the way, baseball score, putting the baseball box scores, that was a big sell for newspapers. That way you can follow up before before radio and everything else. It's a big deal. Baseball is really good for stats. But back to this. Here's an example of yellow journalism, and a great one. The World. Pulitzer sent down Frederick Remington, the famous Western artist. If you go to the Historical Society, there's a couple of Remington's paintings. He drew kind of dramatic pictures of cavalry charges and things like that. But to make extra money, he would also sketch work for newspapers. End of 97, he went down to Havana, and looking for the revolution. But he found nothing. The guerrillas had hit the hills and nothing was going on. He wired back to Pulitzer, there's nothing going on. I have nothing to draw a picture of. Can I come home? And Pulitzer sent back, you supply the pictures. I'll supply the war. Just give me stuff. So we just started drawing pictures like this one. If you can't read it, it says, Spaniards search women on American steamers. Those are passenger ships. Look at that picture. Look at him, this leering Spaniard, all surrounding her, naked as a searcher. Now, technically, they say they'd be searching for weapons that might have the guerrillas, but that looks like something else horrible is going to happen. Does that remind you of the picture I showed you yesterday? Which picture?
The one with the hierarchy of races.
They had the 4 different races and the white Caucasian woman. Isn't it almost the same thing? Something sinister and horrible. So they play on that. You think this really happened? No, nothing like this at all. The Spaniards weren't crazy. They're a weak country now, and America's an up-and-coming economic giant, and they're an ocean away. They're not crazy, but makes good press, doesn't it? Sounds scary. McKinley actually didn't want war, but this started pushing him to war. And let me show you one more picture real quick. Here's Cuba. Another one. This is a painting done of a drawing that was in the Herald. Then it came back, then they repainted it. So here is the duty of the hour, to save her not only from Spain, but from a worse fate. So here's Spain, and Cuba. And here's the anarchy of that revolution. And what's frying her? The Spanish misrule. Now, a couple things. Notice her face? Isn't that different than the face I showed you of Queen Liliuokalani when they're trying to discredit her? Now they want to. She is darker, so there's that light dark, there's that element of race there, but still, they want us to be something. That's more like that picture of the Caucasian, isn't it? I'm using these racial things, but race really was huge here. And there's something else. If Spanish rule goes away, what happens to her? What's that? Yeah, she falls into the fire. So you can't just get rid of Spain. You can't just get rid of Spanish rule. Cuba will still be in trouble. Who's got to come in and save her and rule? The United States. Isn't that a clever cartoon? I mean, first service, oh, this will help Spain or help Cuba. Wait a second. it's clever in a very imperialistic way. So another good cartoon. The faces matter. Boy, well, I'll show you some. And this is actually where yellow journalism comes from. One of the first colored cartoons was called Hogan's Alley, and the main character, the Yellow Kid. It was so popular that yellow journalism took its name. And you can look from this cartoon, it says the crowd gets up, an election bonfire, and the Yellow Kid plays Nero. If you know anything about Roman history, the Emperor Nero supposedly played his lute, but obviously his fiddle, as Rome burned, when Rome was catching fire. This is a New York election, and all of you have kind of followed New York 1890s politics, right? So this is pretty easy. You understand. I mean, I don't need to explain, but there's a goat. That's pretty cool. There's a pigeon. There's a cat. Hot pants, get it? Okay, and yeah, that was the thing. You put a match or a rag in someone's back pocket and you light it on fire. And then a hot foot, you put a match in their shoe and light the match. We used to have so much fun. Huh? Well, no, you put it like so the match is in your hot back. Oh. See, we used to have fun when I was a kid. Don't do that. But if you decide you have to do it, who told you to do it?
Hellish.
So we go from the hellish or Lars?
Cool.
And Fukar?
Yeah.
All of them, they're in cahoots together. So, she was probably the master. So with that, I try to stop you. So, and there's a little racial element and things like that. Okay, so, McKinley didn't want war, but a couple things would change. First off, sensational journalism does come today, so I had that up there. There's Bat Boy. I think that's hilarious. The World Weekly News went out of business about 10 years ago, which is a shame. You know, you'd be waiting at the grocery store and they'd be up, you know. Look at these. But think of Bat Boy. Bat Boy escapes, then Bat Boy joins the army. Want more Bat Boy? I don't got any more. Okay, so we're coming to the DeLome letter. The DeLome letter was Duane de Delome was the Spanish ambassador to the United States. And he was writing a letter back, he's writing it back to Spain. But it was intercepted, and I'll tell you in a second, and printed in the newspapers. And so this was not meant to go public, but it was printed. And now, in italics, you can see what the DeLome letter says. So you can read it, and then what does it mean? Good thing I said James. What does it say? He's obviously attacking McKinley. What does it say McKinley is? Yeah. Say it again. And say the last one. Oh, party food. I said something else. I thought, wait a second. I must have something weird in my head. I couldn't get it out. Yeah. He will please whatever people say. Or do whatever people say. And does he have his own opinions? He has no opinion. It's spineless. Now, McKinley didn't want war, but once this got public, it made him look weak. And the thing was, the reaction to the United States was, how dare someone from another country? How dare the ambassador from another country attacks an American president? And Spain is doing atrocities like that in Cuba, and then they attack American presidents like that. Oh, sure, we can attack our own president, but you can't. The funny thing is, most people thought McKinley was kind of adult. They thought he was a solely owned entity of what person? Yeah. And so they actually, they were saying this themselves, but they got mad when a Spaniard said it. The president kind of represents the U.S. in many ways. Just as our president today represents the U.S. because we don't have like a king, so it's the president. And so they saw this, they were furious. Now, let's be clear about it. His own Undersecretary of the Navy, Teddy Roosevelt, once said about McKinley, he doesn't have the backbone of a chocolate eclair. Yeah, wow. But how dare Dubois, or Delome, Dubois Delome. Oh, I forgot. Isn't that a cool mustache? The only thing is, I wish that little part here was curled up, right? Don't you agree? Who's with me? Yeah, that's so obvious. You curl them up. I used to have a mustache like that. What happened? You just got to be too cool. No, I never had a mustache. I know I make it work, but I never had one. And McKinley, also, Hannah, after this, Hannah's thinking, you're talking to business leaders. We can make a lot of money out of this war. If the U.S. goes to war and gets an empire, they'll need a bigger military. Bigger military, more steel, more weapons, more oil, more food, uniforms. We might really get rich off of this thing. And so McKinley started to be pushed by business interests after the Lone Letter. So to look tough, he sent down the obsolescent battleship, the USS Maine. When I mean obsolescent, it's not quite obsolete, but it's nearing the end. It had steel armor, but it had lower powered guns, old steam turbines. It was an old battleship to intimidate the Spanish. They also sent better battleships, or better warships to the Pacific. And what happened to the Maine in Havana Harbor? What's that? And 258 people died. Here's the New York Journal headline. The explosion of the Maine. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Roosevelt convinced the explosion was not an accident. Naval officers think the Maine was destroyed by a Spanish mine. They're going to offer a $50,000 reward. That was a big thing they would do for crimes in the city. We'll offer a $10,000 reward. And they even draw you a handy picture to let you see it. Do you see the mine? Underwater mine, right under the ship. Did they have evidence of this? They don't need evidence. Who else could do it? The Spanish. Look at what the world did. They don't even hold anything back. Not only a massive explosion, not only saying it was a bomb or torpedo and we know it. You see it? Even a body on fire being blown into the water. They pull no punches here, implying without a doubt who did it. The Spanish. Look at that monster. Well, after the Maine blew up, everybody was convinced, and they're being told the Spanish blew it up. And that became the slogan. Remember the Maine? The hell with Spain. Let's get them. And so this was my last year's sign for the library. I saved it. That's why I remember the Maine and hell with Spain. And this experience will be in the library. So, with that, and so, that's the ship that was sunk in Havana Harbor. They later drug it out a little bit further. The mast is in Arlington National Cemetery. When people go down to Havana today, it's a popular place to go scuba diving into the wreckage of the Maine. Has anyone been scuba diving? Yeah, yeah. Did you like it?
No.
I'm with you. I'm too claustrophobic. I tried it. It's, and people are like, oh, this is great. We're not supposed to be underwater. Moving on. Here's where the funeral procession went through New York City. And hundreds of thousands of people came out to see the procession. And this will force President McKinley, who's now being pushed by Hannah, to ask Congress for, it wasn't quite a declaration of war, but in essence it was. It basically gave congressional approval for war. But there were a lot of needly words in there because there was a lot of congressmen who did not want this war for empire. And so April 25th, 1898, you just need to know 1898. Congress, we go to war. Why? The Spanish blew up the Maine. Did the Spanish blow up the Maine? I can say with about 99.9 infinity certitude, not quite 100, but as close as you get. No, they weren't crazy. Why would they ever try to blow up the Maine? That would push the United States to do something, and Spain was weak and across an ocean. There's also talk that maybe the guerrillas blew it up to get the U.S. into the war. That's crazy too. What if it didn't work? And why would you kill Americans to try to get Americans into the war? It was almost certainly an accident, and it was probably coal dust. coal dust in in those tight confined rooms, if there's a lot of it and a spark, it can blow up. Incredibly volatile. Almost certainly coal dust. Does this declaration of war remind you of another war? Where Lincoln would say, show me the spot where American blood was shed. Oh, that's it? Yeah, the Mexican-American War on the Texas border. And that was it. Does it almost exactly? They said it happened, but they didn't know. It might have, but they said it happened, they didn't know. That's a lie. And this would happen again in Vietnam. It happened again. It happened a number of times, but really big ones. Vietnam would be the next really big one, and then the end went into Iraq. So you also see a levy for troops made. Remember the National Guard created after the Great Upheaval? They sent the National Guard, and then they said each state must get a certain number of recruits. And there's this kind of euphoria. Let's go have fun in a war. But they accidentally put another 0 on the quota they demanded for Montana. And Montana sent a disproportionately large number of troops to this war. Yeah.
I thought after the Civil War, people realized war wasn't fun because they had photographs of it. So I went to the exact.
Yeah, that's a long time ago.
Okay.
It happens every time. Right? And you see the same kind of thing would happen, and then people forget. There's a euphoria. And you would think no one would ever have done anything like war again after World War I. Then World War II happened. You think no one would ever be that crazy. Yeah. So you've once again used logic. You got to stop that. So Teddy Roosevelt was the Undersecretary of the Navy. And he sent the order out, took a lot of credit for it, even though it's most certainly ordered from above, for the first U.S. military action of the war. Now remember, the war is about Cuba, right? Where was the first military action?
The Philippines.
Exactly. The United States would attack the Philippines. The U.S. had a base right here at Hong Kong. It was a British colony, so they called it the Asiatic Fleet back then. 16 of our best warships. They were small vessels, but Spain just had 16 old, still with iron armor in Manila Bay, down here. And in the Battle of Manila Bay, the U.S. ship sailed in under Commodore Thomas Dewey and decimated the obsolete Spanish fleet. Now, the U.S. by then had guns between 8 and some of the guns were 9 inches wide, 9-inch diameter. Had big shells that could fire almost 14,000 yards. So we're talking 6 to 8 miles accurately. But they never practiced. They still practice like they're going to fight 100 yards apart. So 99% of the rounds the American ships fired missed. But the ones that hit blew away the obsolete Spanish fleet. It was a destruction. Most of the ships, most of them would be so damaged they ground themselves. They go just ground themselves on the beach. And the Spanish fleet was destroyed. Dewey would become a national hero. Do you want to see a picture of Dewey? Dewey had some issues, big ears, pointy teeth, but Dewey would, okay, if you look up Dewey, the first thing that came up was Mickey Rat. So, I have Mickey Rat. I know what you're thinking. Rat time. Over the printer. Rat time. That's where, that one. Rat time. There's another picture of Dewey. I prefer that. But he would become a great American hero, and then would make a couple, thought he'd be the next president, make a couple blunders and disappear. But the Filipinos were also revolting against Spanish rule. And they thought the Americans were there to do what? They're going to liberate us. You, huh? Yeah. We'll give you a better colonial master. And so with that, then the United States began to build their army up in Florida. The U.S. had a tiny army. But before that could happen, the anti-imperialists had to be appeased. And those anti-imperialists would be appeased with the Teller Amendment. The Teller Amendment was done to say, hey, it's not a war for empire. It's not a war for conquest. Cuba will remain independent. We don't even want Cuba. We're doing it to defend Cuban liberty. to bring, in fact, they would start using the word democracy then. This cartoon shows it again. So it's supposed to represent like a play, and they're all dressed up. There's Spain as the villain. Here's the hero, Uncle Sam, with deformed wrists. And look at Cuba. The damsel in distress. The same thing, and you notice the face, very much like the. And there's a couple other ones of these. Same kind of one with, here's Uncle Sam defending Cuba. Look at the face. Compared to the face of Queen Lily I showed you yesterday. We'll come back to this. Okay, so the U.S. Army expanded very quickly to 250,000 men, another 50,000 in the Navy. Poorly trained. Those show regular soldiers. Back then they had cotton, navy blue tops, khaki bottom. But most of the soldiers were still wearing Civil War era navy blue wool uniforms. Now, navy wool would be good in the jungle, correct? Why? It keeps the heat out. So you're cool inside. I mean, that's logical. That's science. So with that, can you imagine how miserable those guys must have been? The Spanish had white cotton uniforms. By the way, you're thinking, wait, didn't they learn about camouflage? They literally were just starting to figure out we need camouflage. Rifles went from a range of about 100 to 150 yards to accurately these rifles can go a half mile. You better not be walking around in bright uniforms anymore. They're all, except for the French, will adopt at least dull uniforms. So, yeah, we had a very good rifle, but it had one little problem. Its fine parts inside of this bolt action rifle jammed in humid weather. That won't be a problem in Cuba. We didn't buy machine guns. We're still using 1870s era Gatling guns. They're black powder, but they fired a big 60 caliber bullet, which you could almost see coming at you and whiz by you. How big 60 calibers? And that's massive. So when they did this, and one other thing, the Americans were all these gung-ho volunteers. The Spaniards were drafted, conscripted. And most of them were like, I don't care if we keep Cuba. Why am I fighting? And so the first soldiers sent to Tampa, which would be the main demarcation point, were black soldiers. Remember, they had black soldiers right off. They called them black regiments. The thought was, and this should give you a little idea of the racial ideas of the time, that blacks would be less susceptible to yellow fever, which is patently ridiculous. But that was this weird sciencey belief. But when they got to Tampa, in the town, the black soldiers were horribly mistreated. What were the name of the segregation laws in the South? Do you remember that? Jim Crow laws. They weren't allowed into certain neighborhoods, kind of like sundown neighborhoods. Remember sundown towns? They wouldn't be allowed to eat in most places. A number of black soldiers were arrested for trying to go to places saying, we're soldiers fighting for you. So, and then what happened, it started out basically a couple black soldiers were beaten and arrested. Their friends in the army tried to bail them out, and then they were attacked by white soldiers and white civilians, and they called that the Tampa riot. And it was a big, later on, the name race riot in the 20th century, and this would be one of many of them involving black soldiers. Yeah.
Where did the white soldiers go at it? Weren't they fighting for each other, or were they
They're black.
racist?
Racism had that insidious effect. The same way you have basically the same kind of class of people, black soldiers, wouldn't join up with white workers, even though they're similar class. Racism's insidious. I mean, it really is. And so, Teddy Roosevelt would start his own regiment. And his own regiment he called the Rough Riders. Now, Roosevelt's father hired a substitute during the Civil War, so he was kind of embarrassed. And so he wanted to have his own, or wanted to be a hero in war. And so, evidently, he was an up-and-coming New York politician. And so reporters followed him. And everything he did was reported back in Washington, D.C., partially because he's really flamboyant. He gave great quotes. He was an exciting, interesting, very intelligent man. And this is one of the very stylized pictures of the cavalry charge, and all dressed in buckskin. What hill did they supposedly take? through the San Juan Hill. Is that what you're thinking of? Well, this is actually what they look like. They look just like everybody else. And you notice something else? You see horses. They were so unprepared for this war. The Army Navy had not fought a major operation since the Civil War, that they forgot gear, they didn't have enough ships, they loaded everything wrong, that they didn't have enough room for the cavalry horses. So the cavalry walked. All the horses had to be used to haul the wagons and the cannon. So they walked, and they didn't take San Juan Hill, by the way. So when that happened, the plan was take Puerto Rico, and they would land down here at a place called Santiago, because that's where the Spanish fleet was. If they knock out the Spanish fleet, they'd have to surrender because they can't resupply. So they landed, here's Santiago. They're right here. Santiago. They landed a little bit east, and they are so lucky. No Spaniards were there at the most obvious landing place. I mean, just stupid on the Spanish part. They were not well led. And we're really lucky, the United States. We didn't have enough whale boats, the big rowboats, to row the supplies ashore. And then they haphazardly lost a lot of the food and other gear, and they didn't have enough whale boats to get the horses and mules ashore. So how'd they get them ashore? So a lot of these mules were in the army before, horses. And then they bought a bunch of new ones. So the thought was they'd put men with bugles, and the horses would, well, they'd push them overboard. And then they'd swim to the bugles, and the rest of the horses and mules would follow. About a third decided to go to Venezuela. And they're still going. They're okay, don't worry. But, yeah, they lost a third of the horses. A third started swimming south. That gives you an idea how bad they run this operation was. Fortunately, the Spaniards were poorly led and didn't want to be there. So they went to these hills, El Cami, Kettle, and here's San Juan Hill. We had a citadel on top, surrounded by a granite boulder wall. And here are Spanish forces. They're wearing white, but for some reason that's some in blue, but they're all in white. But this contemporary watercolor shows who took it. Teddy Roosevelt took the credit, and this would propel him eventually to the presidency. But look at the men charging up the hill. Who are they? What are they? That is a part of 2 black infantry regiments. The Rough Riders were part of the charge to take smaller and less defended Kettle Hill. Nothing wrong with taking a smaller or less defended one. Black soldiers, the black regiments, took San Juan Hill. But Teddy Roosevelt would sweep in and take all the credit, claiming that he would personally rally. He actually used the term cowardly blacks, which gives you an idea about the racial ideas at that time, and took San Juan Hill. Remember those Gatling guns? Those big 60 caliber bullets hit this rock wall and exploded the rocks right into the faces and eyes of the Spaniards. And a lot of them were like, not really that motivated. What would you do if that was happening around you? Yeah. And it's kind of like, the hell with it. And they left. And so, yes, it was hard to take the hill, but that contributed, ironically, those old weapons. So that's a pretty cool painting. And their backpacks were horrible, so they did Civil War style after gear of the flanks. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, why you can't, like, so on the hill that's supposed to be the Black Regiment.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just wondering why they didn't make it more. Like in all the other cartoons that we've seen, like people of color have been a lot darker, like mostly, and it's not really as noticeable in this picture. Did they do that for a reason, or it just cuts?
This was actually done by someone who was black, and it was done just trying to say how it was more like not quite as dark. So they weren't done as terrible.
Gotcha.
And so when the hill fell, actually this became a big deal, and they took a picture of the bombed out citadel, the fortress, and painted it for a postcard, and I just think that's really funny. Splashed some green on it. Hey, it's like you're there. And once San Juan Hill fell, artillery got up there, the Spanish Navy couldn't stay in the harbor, they tried to flee and were destroyed, and that ended the war. The Spanish realized we can't, and the war ended like that. Just like that. And I know what you're thinking. What did it really look like? Thomas Edison did an incredibly realistic version of the charge of okay, these are the jungles of New Jersey. And isn't this almost exactly what you would have thought? They show these in vaudeville films, and the people are like, watch this, and they would fire they're like, ah! And they cheer, yay! I know you all want to cheer. And then this is my favorite part. And then here comes the cavalry. And then it disappears, and more guys charge. Doesn't really look like a hill, does it? And also you might be thinking, what else was fun? Oh, here they come. Yay. Okay. Same year.
From the Library of Congress in Washington,
preserved
D.C.
this for you. Cats boxing from 1899. Keep your left up. Keep your left up. Okay. Poor Keith. All right.
Are they being like
Yeah, that sadistic guy back there is holding the harnesses. All right. What this was known as, but it's 1899. Those cats, they got it. Okay, they got it. Yeah.
Is this Spanish American War, is that an example of what people always thought war would be, where one battle would just
Yeah. That's what they thought, but there was one battle, but actually it would go on for 3 more years.
oh, okay.
And so Iraq was like that. The decrepit Iraqi army collapsed, yet the fighting went on and on. So and you'll see why in just a sec. So the initial part of the war was over. And all you needed to have is a splendid, that's what Secretary of State John Hay called it. What a splendid little war that 3,000 Americans and 30,000 Spaniards died in. He didn't though. Isn't that kind of what a sociopath would say? But you don't need these numbers. I just put it down to give you an idea how the initial part of the war, only 345 died in battle, but look how many died in other. 8 times more men died because of what 2 things? This is what we need. 8 times more died because of what 2 things? Well, actually, malaria wasn't as big a killer as yellow fever, but disease and food poisoning. Food poisoning. This was the first war where soldiers were eating the new wondrous canned food. These processed foods. And they would eat that for every meal. Think about how that would have seemed so glorious. Yeah, this canned food that you could carry with you. You wouldn't have to worry about bringing as many rations or like driving a herd of cows to be slaughtered. No, it's right there. Open up the cans. And they put these orders out, and they started putting out these canned food. I just showed this can of corn. Look how they soldered the lid with lead. Lead adds flavor. But here's what happened. They made these orders out for the food. And all these food processors were like, oh, and they charged top dollar. They made so much money because it was a rush order. So they just put everything in the slaughterhouse and dumped it all in the can. They went down the basement, and there was all these racks of animals that they couldn't sell during the panic when the economy crashed. They're not refrigerated, they're just there. These gray, petrified beef, they called it. They ground it up, and what do you think the gravy in the can is for? It hides everything in there, doesn't it? They put a little borax, which is a detergent, some alum, which is kind of a preservative, so to speak. Yeah, they're toxic, but don't worry about it. And a few other things. Maybe they dipped it in some acid and said it was cooked and clean, dumped it in a can and gave it to the soldiers. Now, people were eating canned food before, but that would be like once in a while. Here, they're eating it for every meal. And a large number of soldiers got sick. Remember the Montana National Guard stuck his spoon into a can of bully beef? Bully beef was like older steer, so a little bit stringy. And so he thought it was going to be beef. Hey, eat protein. Stick it there. Clank. Anybody want to guess? Dug out. No. A horseshoe nail. So what does that mean, what's going into that can?
Horse.
Not just horse. The hooves. And I want my nails ground up. Who's with me? So what does that tell you is going in that can? They were putting whatever they can as quickly as quickly as possible to make money. That is why it's no coincidence. Part of the Progressive Era reforms will say, look, we're cutthroat capitalists. They'll cut any corner to make money. And that's when people really begin to see it for food, and that's why tomorrow I'm giving that bit of the jungle that talks about food. Because it'll fit in with the first little era of reform. I know what you're thinking. I mean, when we get those ground up food products, like hot dogs or chicken McNuggets, we expect all those things to be ground up, right? The beans, the head, the... Makes sense?
Yeah.
That's actually a really good question, and you can imagine how companies hated this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because companies love me to do this because you make money. And if you have a monopoly, you have no place else to buy what you want. Then I give you that. I know it's never quite the same when you're forced to read it. And I put it over here. And so it's an excerpt from a novel called The Jungle, and then it has a couple other little stories about food. But the thing about this, think about it. Don't just think about it. But think about this is what cultural capitalism is. So underlying examples of cultural capitalism. And then there are actually 8 questions. You can only do 4. 3, 4. Sounds good? And it's not Tuesday, Tuesday, but and you're going to, you told me.
I have just a meet tomorrow, but it's like during school. So Gabby went to Salt Lake.
Gabby went to Salt Lake. You are back.
Gymnastics.
Oh, I keep thinking
Yeah.
All right, see you Monday. 60s movies, and then Caution and
Self-teaching. What are symbols
But the big thing is to make sure they don't do the same.
Yeah. So like, well, what about?
I hope everyone liked that movie. I love that movie.
Which one?
Huh?
Oh,
Oh yeah, you skipped yesterday. You skipped yesterday too. Said figure out a way to watch the movie, and on the test I will ask details for that. So talk to me about it. I might Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Somebody colorized it and put it on the YouTube. And the thing about it is it messes up with their algorithms, so they can't see it if it's colorized. So the problem with the colorized, they did it kind of a haphazard way where they just have the computer do it. So the computer would try to identify the shades. So you get very weird color patterns. A lot of green and blue teeth.
that's not my teeth.
Yours are flat. But see, the thing is, no, but they. Oh, I'm sorry.
Where are the Tylenol murders?
Did we do Tylenol murders in Air Miami? I don't know. Couldn't remember.
No, we shouldn't. But Tylenol used to also from capsule you open up that little tiny. That's why we have a chocolate capsule. So we use no more capsules anymore. They're all like capsules. But it was unreal. So we got a little bit left of movies just to kind of finish up 60s movies. I know what a lot of you are thinking, so let's get to it right now. Okay.
I was gone for 2 days.
I found this really ugly photo. So I sent it to Christian Merrill. And he said, I used to have to wear this.
Oh no!
And to the last, it was the worst stuff ever. So it's just funny for all us elderly folks who play.